We'll go back to the SEC and Oklahoma. A couple big pickups for them defensively. Brent Venables, we understand it's been a bit of a rocky start there his first few years at Oklahoma, and things really need to get back on track this season. And they're going to start with the defensive side of the ball here. As Marvin Jones Jr., we'll talk about him first, comes over from Florida State, started his career at Georgia, former 5-star recruit. And this is someone who, bit of a slow start, I would say, at Florida State this season, picked it up near the middle part half of the season, had 4 sacks for the Noles. Obviously, we've talked about FSU's problems defensively. The defensive line didn't live up to the expectations. But another fresh start here for him at Oklahoma, as he's going to be teaming up with a fellow Broward, Fort Lauderdale guy on the defensive line there, R. Mason Thomas at Oklahoma. And historically, Oklahoma a few years back had Nick Bonito from St. Thomas Aquinas in Fort Lauderdale. So they've had some success here with those Broward County products. And Marvin Jones Jr. trying to be the next in line there.
Yeah, you don't think of Oklahoma as necessarily a South Florida recruiter, right? But look, Torrance Marshall, when they won the national championship, was a big-time linebacker for him out of Miami Sunset. So there's precedence. And you mentioned Bonito and R. Mason Thomas. It's funny, you go back to that year in South Florida, it was like a bumper crop of pass rushers. The 5-star Marvin Jones, you had a 5-star Shamar Stewart, who went to Texas A&M, now a projected first-rounder. You had a high 4-star Kenyatta Jackson, who went to Ohio State, played a little bit here in the playoff in the rotation. So there were a lot of guys, but ultimately Mason Thomas probably ended up being the best pass rusher out of all of them, at least to this point, despite being the lowest rated on paper. Really athletic, explosive guy, plays with a high motor. Now, Jones has not to this point showed that relentless killer motor that you had with R. Mason Thomas, but on talent, there's a reason why he was a 5-star. Obviously, his dad was a great player. This for FSU, the size, the athleticism. I mean, I was blown away watching this guy in high school, just his movement patterns for being such a bigger player. At FSU, 25 tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. It never really came together for him. There were a lot of problems at FSU. Patrick Payton, who went to LSU from FSU in the portal, he also underperformed. The defensive tackles underperformed. The whole defensive line underperformed. It was not just Marvin Jones. And of course, at Georgia, he was behind a lot of really good players that you're going to see drafted here in the NFL draft coming up in a few months. So could Oklahoma be the spot that unlocks more with him? It's in his body. He definitely has the traits. And maybe playing with a guy like R. Mason Thomas, who is so relentless in his pass rush with his motor. Marvin Jones says, man, I'm better than this guy. I've always been higher rated than this guy. And he's the one that's the star. And I'm kind of, the person with something to prove. Let me show him what I got. I could see this being a very, very good situation for Marvin Jones. And if he is able to fill his potential, a great situation for Oklahoma, because this is a 5-star talent when you talk about size and athletic ability.
So that was a big pickup for them in terms of a pass rusher, but they got someone on the back end of the defense in Kendal Daniels, who this is, I'm sure when Oklahoma State and Oklahoma, do they play? Are they playing anymore? Is Bedlam still? Let me check on that right now, but that's going to be a pretty contentious situation there between Oklahoma State fans. Kendal Daniels, one of the most productive players over the past few seasons in the country, and he's labeled as a defensive back, but you could see some linebacker to his game with the physicality and versatility that he brings to the position.
Yeah, former top 100 recruit. I mean, superstar freshman in 2022. Big 12 freshman of the year, 71 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 3 INTs, 8 pass breakups. That was as a safety, a big safety. He has since transitioned into a linebacker, really mostly last season with that transition, 6'4", 235. Look at his career numbers, 240 tackles, 24 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, 13 pass breakups, 5 INTs. Last year as a full-time linebacker, I watched a couple of games of his, just studying him when he entered the portal. There was an adjustment there, but you could see it starting to click. 64 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks last year as a linebacker. And, I think with that transition, we've seen it with players. The first year, it's rough. The second year, it starts to come together. A lot of times you see that happen in the pro level. 2 guys that jump to mind, James Williams, Ray Armstrong, Ray Armstrong played about 8 years in the pros, a former highly touted safety about this size. James Williams, former 5-star, who was comped a lot to Isaiah Simmons out of high school. He makes a transition to linebacker his rookie year with the Tennessee Titans, ends up starting at the end of the year, but it was a transition. Daniels already made that transition, already has a season at linebacker. So you're getting him with some experience in a position to potentially blow up at that spot. You think of Brett Venables. Who's one of Brett Venables' most famous proteges, maybe his most famous protege as far as being that queen on the chessboard on the defensive end? Isaiah Simmons, right? Who do you think of when you watch Kendal Daniels as that big safety / linebacker? Isaiah Simmons. So I think that had a lot to do with why Kendal Daniels ultimately chose Oklahoma. Obviously, it's an area he's familiar with and where he's from. But I think that particular part of it, the Simmons factor and how he was used in this scheme, is very big. And if you're an Oklahoma fan, if you have your own Isaiah Simmons, that's going to make your defense look totally different. I think, look, these are two former highly rated players, but with Daniels, you know that this guy can produce. Now, one thing I'll say, Pete, is Oklahoma State fans were not very happy with Daniels' effort towards the end of the year. Now, that happens a lot when you have these disappointing seasons, particularly on defense, and you have a highly rated defender who maybe's not playing, full speed on a snap. They tend to get a lot of venom, right? Because you're frustrated with the defense and you're frustrated with this high name player not going 100%. Watching the film, I thought he played with a pretty good temperament. I didn't have too many concerns watching, a few of his games from last season, but I could see with the clips that people post on social media why he upset Oklahoma State fans at the end. But again, that was a team that was really struggling on defense in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and Bedlam is dead. R.I.P. to Bedlam. It was the last game was 2023. I remembered that as soon as I started saying it, but it's hard not to associate them when you have a guy transferring from one of these schools to another.
And by the way, Beggs, Oklahoma, where Daniels is originally from, so hometown here for him. And it's going to be interesting to see how he is received by the Oklahoma State faithful on the internet, especially if he has a good year.
Yeah, nice portal haul though here for Oklahoma defensively there, and obviously the crown jewel of that class being John Mateer. So Venables doing everything he can to reshape what's been going on over there.